one of the things that we might want to override is the default background color, right, for these for these headers and these footers, right? And notice also how it's not correctly showing on the large screen, right? We might want to override the default behavior. So for instance, let's look at some of the things that we could override, right? One idea would be to inspect it, right, and see what renders it. And notice that it's being rendered right here. Let's close this. It's this nav bar over here, right? Notice that it has this orange part that is pushing down everything else. Notice that it has a looks like there's a green margin on the right-hand side. There's a margin over here. Inside we have the container fluid. Let's see if we can find any colors. There it is. Looks like this is a color. Looks like this is a color that is setting the background color for this, right? Let me make it like that. There you go. Right, so it looks like this is setting the background color, and let's try it out, right? If we start typing some other color, looks like that is what it's changing the color, right? And we would like to perhaps override it, right? So let's change it to something with some contrast. Now, in general, it's preferable that you use hexadecimal code, right, or hexadecimal numbers. But these colors are just fine. So let's use maybe something dark blue. Let's see what might we use. Turquoise? No. How about just dark blue? Let's go with dark blue. So if we go with dark blue, notice that there's a border color that is very thin that you can't see. We can just turn that off if we don't want the border. Notice that it's changing there. Or we can make it the same color as the background color. Okay. Now to override it, what we could do is just copy this style. We can copy it. Notice that this is being declared by one of Bootstrap's libraries, right? One of several Bootstrap libraries. What we want to do is override it. So to override it, what we could do is notice that we are loading here the Bootstrap min. And notice that we declare our own styles.css right after Bootstrap. See that? Right? What that allows us to do is whatever styling we declare in our styles.css, because it's declared after Bootstrap, it'll override whatever Bootstrap says. Right? So we can go to our Bootstrap file, right? Our styles file, and put in our new rule .navbar defaults, right? With our own color for borders and background, right? If we refresh, notice that now it has permanently been changed, right? If you explore on the right-hand side, you'll notice that our rule says that it should be dark blue. And notice that the rules that were originally there from Bootstrap have a strikeout. See that? That says that they're being overwritten by someone else, right? Which happens to be our styles.css. Everybody good? All right. Another thing we might want to change is perhaps the color of the font, and that, let's see, where would that be? Let's try to click on this, see if it's way down here. It's on the hyperlink. Let's see, we have any colors here? Looks like there's a color here, right? It looks like that's what's changing it. Let's try changing it to white. Indeed, that is changing it. Right? It is changing it. So again, we can do the same thing, right? We can copy the rule. We can copy the rule and bring it over to the style sheet, our own style sheet, and change it to color to white. If we refresh, notice that indeed it is now white. Okay. Notice that what's happening here is that we have two classes involved, right? All of these were just one single class. See that? But we have two classes, and there's a space between them. See that? Right? What this means is that there's a relationship between these two classes. There's a hierarchical relationship, right? There is in this case there's a parent-child relationship. This is a parent. There's an element that has this class. And then somewhere nested in that parent element, there is another element that has this class. Yes? That's what this says. Right? And indeed, we see that indeed the hyperlink is indeed nested inside of navbar default. See that? And that's exactly what the rule says. There's some ancestor who has this class, and there is some child, right, or grandchild who has this other class, and indeed that's what's happening, right? This grandchild, and that's the parent, the grandparent up there, right, declaring that, and that's what the space is interpreted. There's several other characters here that allow you to create these relationships. In particular, there's this one, the greater than, which is interpreted as an immediate child as opposed to a descendant, right? So this says an immediate child who has this class, right? That would trigger this rule, right? Since we don't have that, notice that it is no longer overriding Bootstrap's default behavior. Yes? Everybody okay? I'm not going to get into all the details here. I just want to make you aware of these. Everybody good? We're still with me? All right. Let's see what's happening here. Looks like that's the navbar there. That's the container fluid. That's the navbar header. Notice that looks like it's all shrunk up, right? For some reason. And notice that there's a rule that goes with it that says that for large screens, right, it's not really doing anything with it, right? We could override it and say that I want to stretch and take up the entire width of the page, right? So for instance, we could say that the width, oops, it's 100%, right? Notice that now it extends across the page as you might expect, right? As opposed to being scrunched up all the way to the left-hand side, right? So we can override that and say that the navbar header, right? Navbar header, we can override it and say navbar header is width 200. Okay, so that now, you know, as we become smaller and smaller and smaller, right? It's always of a bigger size. Make sense, right? Also, the color of this hyperlink looks weird. So if you look at that, the color comes from this span here. Let's see. Let's see where the color is. There it is. So it has navbar default, navbar link. Looks like it's this one right here. We can override that. So let's override that rule. Let's copy that and put it down here. Okay, there it is. What about these down here? What are those? Let's see. Those is down here. Let's see who's changing their color. All right, looks like it's because they're hyperlinks. Right, they're hyperlinks, and in general, hyperlinks, that is their default color, right? So if we override that, that probably is a better contrast. I don't want to change all the hyperlinks to be white, right? So we might want to try something that is more specific, right? Target something that perhaps is inside of, let's see, maybe under navbar text or navbar container, maybe. Let's see, container. No, inside of maybe navbar. How about that? Let's grab this navbar, this rule. We'll say that navbar default, right? Notice what's happening here. This is all these classes are being applied to this nav. See that? Right? The way you specify that in the rules is by not putting spaces. Right? This is a combination of several classes being applied to the same elements. Okay? Spaces mean that there is a hierarchy. You know, here there is no hierarchy. They're all being applied to the same exact element. See that? Right? So this is class navbar and class navbar default and navbar fixed default. Well, actually, these are ORs. Right? They're saying that if you say dot navbar, you'll grab any navbar. Right? But if you want to be more specific, you can say navbar dot navbar default. You're saying I want at least these two to be there. Right? I'm not going to grab navbar fixed bottom because there's nothing peculiar about the styling that only applies to footers, Right, so I'm just grabbing these two, navbar default. There they are. And down below, there's some hyperlink. There it is, that hyperlink that follows under this. So what this reads is that, hey, starting at some navbar with some navbar default, and then some sibling nested in there that is a hyperlink, I want to change the color to be white. Color to be white. The hexadecimal for white is FFF. Actually, FFF. And that seemed to work. There it is. Okay? Everybody okay? All right. Right. So we've extended the width of the fixed top. You can do the same thing for the bottom. Right. Extend it to take up the entire width of the page, as opposed to all being scrunched up to the left-hand side. I'll leave that to you. Let's see what else. I think we're pretty much done here. Obviously, these are not the colors I like. Choose whatever colors you think are nice for you. Let's see. Okay, so let's start playing around with the other pages, like clicking here and navigating to the edit page or navigating to the add a new page. And I've lost my navigation bar again. All right, so let's work on navigating here. All right? Okay, and I'll do that in the next video.